I beg to move that this House do now adjourn.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. John McDonnell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'll assure you the word "you" will not pass my lips throughout this debate. Okay. I've called this adjournment debate to raise the urgent matter of the ongoing detention of Alaa Abd El-Fattah. That name has been raised in the House in the earlier debate, and I'm grateful for the number of members who have actually highlighted this case. But this gives us the opportunity of going into slightly more depth with regard to his position. Alaa is a celebrated British-Egyptian writer. He's a co-recipient of this year's PEN Pinter Prize, but he spent the past decade imprisoned in Egypt. Alaa has been imprisoned for his writings on human rights, on technology and in support of democracy. He's an Amnesty International prisoner of conscience, and over those 10 years, tragically, Alaa has been denied the right to be with his young son, who lives and attends school in Brighton. And I welcome members of his family in the gallery today. Alaa's current detention should have ended on the 29th of September, when his most recent 5-year sentence ended. But his appalling imprisonment was for the crime, to quote, of spreading false news, because he shared a Facebook post detailing acts of torture against another inmate. However, the date of his sentences ended, but the Egyptian government refused to release him. They argued that his 2 years spent languishing in pre-trial detention did not count towards his sentence. This is in complete violation of international law norms, as well as Egypt's own domestic law. So let me just offer briefly just a list of those who have called for Alaa's release, because it's extraordinary the scale of support there is for him internationally. Our last 4 UK Prime Ministers have supported his release, demanded his release. The President of France, the Chancellor of Germany, the White House, the editorial boards of some of the most significant newspapers across the globe, including The Guardian and The Washington Post, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, and 14 Nobel laureates for literature. And that's just a few.
On that point, will my honourable friend give way? I thank my right honourable friend for giving way, and he rightly lists figures of national and international significance who are backing the campaign for Alaa's release. Would he also agree with me that I know in my constituency in Leeds and in constituencies across the country, more and more people, when they hear this heartbreaking story, are really feeling this is a huge injustice, that we want our government to do everything it can to strain every sinew to get Alaa released and reunited with his family.
Can I say to my honourable friend, Alaa's case is becoming a cause célèbre, not just in this country, but across the globe, as demonstrated by the number of significant figures, but actually also from a number of constituents who are now contacting us about this case. Last year, certainly.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I commend the honourable gentleman, right honourable member for Hayes and Harlington, for bringing this forward. I did speak to him in today's debate. I think if the right honourable member had watched it on TV, and I hope he did, that he's seen the Minister come forward with some ideas on how to take it forward. But does he not agree with the continued detention of Alaa Abd-El-Fattah, who has been mentioned as a British citizen? Carrying your British passport has to mean more than just being a British citizen. If it gives you rights, where are the rights? It should raise red flags with the FCDO. And further, does the right honourable member not believe that this deserves a greater push for his release? And I'm hoping in the reply from the Minister later on, after the honourable right honourable member has spoken, will outline some of the things that I believe the government are going to do in a positive fashion.
I'm grateful for the honourable member's intervention. There are some of the issues I'll come on to later in my speech, but it was a running theme earlier today in the debate that took place as well. Just to follow on from what my honourable friend said with regard to Alaa's case and the show of support that there is, last year more than 100 parliaments, they echoed the call in a letter to the then Foreign Secretary, and the call was for his release. In this new Parliament, Alaa has found support, as I've said, across the benches, The example of today's debate about the protection of British nationals arbitrarily detained demonstrated the breadth of that support, and we have a new APPG taking up the case as well. Following the decision by the Egyptian authorities to effectively ignore the end of Alaa's sentence, his mother, Leila Souif, Professor of Mathematics at Cairo University, which I know a number of honourable members have met, she resorted to the only method that she thought she had left and began a hunger strike. Today is the 67th day of that hunger strike. Since the 30th of September, she's consumed no calories, surviving solely on salts, black coffee and herbal tea. She's lost 22% of her body weight. And as anyone who has any experience of hunger strikes, and unfortunately in this country we've known them in the past, we're now entering an extremely urgent and dangerous phase. Leila, who was born in London, felt compelled to take this extreme action because she believed she was not being listened to by either of her governments, both in terms of Egypt or the UK, unfortunately. The Egyptian government has repeatedly targeted Alaa. He was first arrested in 2006 for protesting for the independence of the judiciary. In October 2011, he was arrested after writing a newspaper article detailing the Egyptian military's killing of mostly Egyptian Christian protesters, known in Egypt as the Maspero massacre. The original demonstration was against the demolition of a church. In 2013, he was arrested again. He was falsely accused of organising a protest in violation of Egypt's draconian protest law. He was released from prison in March 2019 after serving his 5-year sentence. But the terms of his release were draconian. He was required to sleep inside a police station every night. So from 6 p.m. until 6 a.m., effectively he was imprisoned again. During this period, Alaa continued to document the ways in which prisoners were treated in Egyptian prisons, publishing articles in the online newspaper Mada. While sleeping in the police station, he was visited in the middle of the night by security agents who threatened him, told him to stop writing, but he refused courageously. Among the many things he wrote and shared was a story on Facebook about a man who died in prison, allegedly after being tortured. After 6 months, he was rearrested. In September 2019, he was arrested whilst inside the police station where he was required to sleep and taken to an undisclosed state security facility. His lawyer, Mohammed El-Bakr, found him and was himself arrested while representing Alaa. The lawyer is now going on to serve 4 years in prison. Alaa was held in inhumane conditions at Tora prison, in a cell with no sunlight, denied access to books, exercise, a radio, a mattress or bedding, or any time out of his cell. He was not even allowed a clock to be aware of the time of the day, so days would pass without him realising. Worst of all, he was placed under the custody of the very same officer who was accused of torturing a man to death. Alaa was held in this nightmare place for 2 years. At that time, understandably, he told his family he was having suicidal thoughts. Then in December 2021, his application for his British passport, his right under the Nationality Act of 1981, came through. A one-time use emergency passport was handed to his family. They went to the prison, but the prison refused to take even letters for Alaa. And the family insisted they deliver a blank postcard of the Queen. The prison guards, I suppose, maybe confused, took the postcard and gave it to him. So for months thereafter, it was the only thing in his cell, a postcard of the Queen. And this was how his family finally let him know that he'd become a British citizen. Alaa and his family thought things would change then. But weeks passed and no consular official arrived. Requests by the British Embassy for consular access to their citizen were denied. And desperate, in April of 2022, Alaa declared himself on hunger strike until the Egyptian authorities allowed the British consular services to access him. That failed. To this day, he's still never received a consular visit. I think many of us will remember the scenes in the run-up to and during COP27, which was held in Egypt. Alaa, with still no movement after months on a Gandhi-style strike of 100 calories a day, escalated to a full water strike. There were scenes of global solidarity with Alaa, from the climate movement to Nobel laureates, world leaders, including the Chancellor Olaf Scholz and President Emmanuel Macron. Our former Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, wrote to Alaa's family before travelling to India.
The honourable gentleman just referred to the member for Richmond by name. He really should know better than to do that.
You got me on that one. Hands up. Okay. I'll hand myself in later. Our former Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Member for Richmond, wrote to Alaa's family before travelling to Egypt. And he said that the government is deeply committed to doing everything we can, I quote, to resolve Alaa's case as soon as possible. Despite this commitment, 2 years on from COP, Alaa's family have nothing to show for the UK government's efforts to secure his release. They feel now, if this new arbitrary extension of Alaa's sentence is allowed to pass without intervention from the British authorities, then they fear, and I think many of us do as well, that he'll never be released. And they have cause to believe this because the Egyptian government has repeatedly engaged in a practice they call case recycling. It's when new cases are brought against prisoners approaching the end of their sentence. According to human rights organisations such as the Cairo Institute for Human Rights Studies, in 2023 at least 251 defendants were rotated into new cases, and another 620 defendants in 2022 in the same way. So the family are began to lose faith in the previous government, with ministers seemingly unwilling to take any action on his case, beyond simply raising the case with their Egyptian counterparts. And all the while, whilst this was going on, what we witnessed was a government seeking ever closer economic ties with the Egyptian government. The election of the new government, our government from this side, did give Alaa's family a renewed sense of hope. The Foreign Secretary has been a supporter of the campaign. He's stood along Alaa's sisters during their sit-in outside the Foreign Office, and he publicly described Alaa as a courageous, and I quote, a courageous voice for democracy in Egypt. In opposition, as Shadow Foreign Secretary, the member outlined a series of practical suggestions for getting Alaa back to the UK. These included leveraging our substantive trade relations with Egypt, restricting the access of the Egyptian ambassador, and pausing new strategic partnerships with the Egyptian government until his case was resolved. The only relevant detail that's changed since the Shadow Foreign Secretary became the Foreign Secretary and made those remarks is that Alaa's sentence has now ended, but he remains in prison. So yes, as the Honourable Gentleman said about the measures that we want to discuss today, I do call upon the Foreign Secretary to stay true to his words, to go back to some of those actions he outlined back in 2022 and see them through. He knew then, as is evident, that a strategy based solely on simply raising the case in meetings will not secure Alaa's release. Ahead of the 29th of September, when Alaa was supposed to be released, multiple members of this House wrote to the Foreign Secretary, alerting him to the end of Alaa's sentence and asking him to ensure appropriate action was taken. And just days before the 29th, the Foreign Secretary was pictured smiling with his Egyptian counterpart. On November the 21st, our Prime Minister was photographed shaking hands with President Sisi. On the 25th of November, I tabled questions whether the PM, the Prime Minister, raised Alaa's case with the President on that occasion. I haven't received a response to that question as of yet. So it's not clear, to be brutally frank, that any serious steps have been taken to alert the Egyptian government to the fact that Britain was expecting Alaa to be released on this date. And it's still unclear whether or not the government has changed their approach to this case.
I beg to move that this House do now adjourn.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. John McDonnell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's still unclear to me whether or not the government has actually changed its approach in this case since that date has passed. We expected a significant change of approach from the last government because the previous methods had failed. So I would welcome an update from the Minister to this House if there has been an approach, a change of approach. And there are a series of steps the government could take that would see Alaa reunited with his family and especially with his son. The Minister should change the travel advice for Egypt on the Foreign Office's website to reflect the reality of the moment. The reality is if a person is arrested in Egypt, the government cannot guarantee even consular access. The United States provides that advice to its citizens. Why don't we? Last year saw a record number of British holidaymakers go to Egypt, a country where tourism is a significant part of the economy. Changing the travel advice to reflect the reality of the situation would demonstrate to the Egyptians that our government was taking Alaa's detention seriously. We know that the Egyptian government is seeking an increase in British investment into Egypt. We should be clear and announce a moratorium on any new trade agreements with Egypt until Alaa is free. In the last month, 15 NGOs, including the Committee for the Protection of Journalists, Fair Square and the Global Magnitsky Justice Campaign, asked the British government to put on hold any new government assistance or promotion of new foreign direct investments into Egypt until Alaa is free. In recent days, we've also seen new research from the campaigns against the arms trade exposing the fact that Britain has sold more than £200 million worth of arms licences to Egypt while Alaa has remained in prison. This included the largest ever single arms licence on record from Britain to Egypt, worth nearly £80 million for military radars in December 2023. I have to say this is further evidence of the depth of the relationship between the UK and Egypt that can and should be leveraged. And it goes without saying that no such deals of this kind must be pursued by the new government while the British citizen is in prison. As the Foreign Secretary has previously suggested, there should be diplomatic consequences for the Egyptian ambassador. How is it right that he continues to be allowed access to the highest levels of our government while refusing to allow British officials in Cairo to do their job under the Vienna Convention on Consular Relations? I wrote to the Egyptian ambassador, I hope he received my email before this debate, in the hope that we would receive some message from him that was positive before the debate and we could break the good news that the Egyptian government had decided to release Alaa. I've received no response whatsoever. So I've outlined some of the measures the government can take to make clear to Egypt that the refusal to recognise Alaa's British nationality and failure to recognise and respect its own laws on time served will have serious consequences for the bilateral relationship. I hope the government can grasp the urgency and the seriousness of the situation, especially in the context of a 68-year-old woman on hunger strike whose life I believe is at risk. I urge the government to take the action necessary to secure Alaa's release in time, hopefully to spend Christmas with his son in Brighton. And I'd like to end by sending a message from this House to Alaa himself. echoing his own words back to him. It's on the title of his book. It says, "You've not been, and we will not let you be defeated." And I say to Alaa, you have not been, and we will not let you be defeated. We will secure your release.
Minister Hamish Falconer.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to acknowledge Alaa's family in the gallery. I'm grateful to the Right Honourable Member for Hayes and Harlington for securing this debate, and I pay tribute to his tireless support for Alaa Abd-El-Fattah and his family. I'm grateful to Honourable Members for their contributions, both in this debate and earlier in the day in the wider debate. I'd like to re-emphasise, both to Alaa's family and to this House, that his release remains a priority for the UK Government. I recognise the profound impact his imprisonment has on him and his family. This Government and myself as the Minister responsible are doing all we can to find a resolution. Our priority remains to reunite him with his family, and until that happens, we're working to ensure he's allowed consular access and support. As I said earlier, supporting British nationals overseas is at the heart of our work at the Foreign Office. That includes dual nationals, and it includes more recent British nationals like Alaa. I have met Mr. El-Fattah's family on a number of occasions, including his incredibly impressive mother, who was here in the chamber last week, and I saw her too in Cairo. I share the concern of the Right Honourable Member about her well-being. She is deep into a hunger strike, and as the Right Honourable Member rightly says, the health implications for her are obviously serious, and I'm sure the whole House shares the Government's concern about her welfare. We will continue to be in regular contact with Mr. El-Fattah's family to discuss this case. The Foreign Secretary met the family recently, including Layla last week. I met her last month during my visit to Cairo, and indeed when she was in this House more recently. Our consular officials and our ambassador in Cairo work round the clock on this case. But at the same time, we know from listening to the families that they feel that more support is required. That is a feeling shared in other cases as well, and as I discussed in this House earlier, that is why we're looking to strengthen our approach with the appointment of a special envoy to work with families on the most complex detention cases, of which Mr. El-Fattah's case clearly is one. I want to turn directly, if I may, Madam Deputy Speaker, to the question of Mr. El-Fattah's nationality, because it is contested. The UK has consistently and unambiguously maintained that he is a British national. That remains the position of the new Labour government. He became a British citizen in December 2021 while he was in detention, but shortly before being sentenced. I should stress the timing of his citizenship in the same month as his sentencing was in no way connected to the UK government's position on his case. As the Foreign Secretary said in this House last week, there's no conspiracy behind this. We have always been clear with Egypt that Mr. El-Fattah was granted nationality in the normal way. He is a British national and is therefore entitled to consular access under the Vienna Convention. We disagree with the Egyptian view that he is a mono-Egyptian national, and with their view that the process for conferring nationality was in any way irregular. So we continue to urge them to grant us consular access under the Vienna Convention on Consular Relations, as they indeed have in other cases of detained dual nationals. Let me say a little about how we have been engaging with Egypt in response to the Right Honourable Members, my Right Honourable friends' comments. Across all of our engagements, we've been clear that this case will only be resolved with Mr. El-Fattah's release. That was the message I delivered when I saw the Foreign Minister Abdulati and indeed their ambassador on what was the first visit by a minister of the new government to Egypt. The Foreign Secretary has also raised this case directly with the Foreign Minister, as has the Minister of State for Development, just this week. And I can confirm to my right honourable friend that the Prime Minister did discuss it with President Sisi in August. And I'd like to reassure Alaa's family and this House that we will continue to press them until Mr Al-Fattah is free and reunited with his family. And Madam Deputy Speaker, I am aware, of course, of the understandable frustration that members feel at Alaa's situation and the desire that the UK government roll back our relationship or drop all economic support. But the truth is, our partnership with Egypt is crucial to alleviating suffering in the region and in our push for wider peace and security in the region. While I was in Egypt, I did announce further assistance to the Egyptian healthcare system in order to support Palestinians who have crossed from Gaza and are in need of urgent medical care. I also signed an MOU aimed to boost their efforts on food security. I know my right honourable friend and many other members in the House are aware of the catastrophic humanitarian situation in Gaza, the humanitarian crisis in Sudan, and the many pressures on Egypt, where poverty is also very high. So while Mr Al-Fattah remains at the forefront of my mind, of the mind of the Foreign Secretary and of the whole government, we will continue to try and ensure that our relationship with Egypt is positive and productive where those efforts are necessary to protect other British nationals and to try and deal with questions of international peace and security. I will.
I want to make it explicitly clear, nobody who's raised this case at all want us to ensure that the UK government is not providing aid and assistance, particularly as a result of the issues that are happening to the Palestinians in Gaza in particular. We're certainly not asking for that. But what we are asking for in terms of the relationship of trade and also the relationship on arms sales, there's the potential leverage there to enable us, I believe, to secure Alaa's release. In addition to that, the relationship with the Egyptian ambassador, again, gives us the opportunity of exercising some leverage. They're the activities that we would like the government to pursue.
Minister.
Thank you. I'll come back to those points in a little while, if I may. At the heart of our general approach is the firm belief that through continued engagement, we can encourage the Egyptians to improve their human rights record, and that a stronger relationship than the one that we inherited would allow us to have the frank and open discussions with key decision makers, as I and colleagues have recently done, to see improvements both in Alaa's case and in relation to the wider human rights and social situation in Egypt. And I'd like to reassure my right honourable friend that in my engagements with both the Egyptian ambassador, with Egyptian ministers, we are clear at all times the importance of this case and the importance for the very many international observers of this case, which my right honourable friend ran through so articulately, that this case is important for Egypt's reputation internationally, and that will, of course, shape the views of investors and others when they think about their engagements. So in conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, the UK remains firmly committed to securing Mr Al-Fattah's release and indeed to reunite him with his family. We'll continue to push Egypt towards a resolution, making clear that the only way to resolve this case is by releasing him. I will.
It's coming to a conclusion. Can we have an assurance that we'll receive a report to the House in the coming month about the effectiveness of the actions that the government has taken in securing Alaa's release?
Madam Deputy Speaker, having been pressed on the case twice in a day, I'm more than happy to commit to return to the House within a month to give a further update. We will, as I say, Madam Deputy Speaker, continue to push Egypt for a resolution, and I thank the right honourable friend for my right honourable friend for his interest and the interest of many others in this House in the case. I have no doubt I will be regularly in this House updating members on our efforts in relation to Mr Al-Fattah, and I know that the whole House is thinking of his mother and the rest of his family during this incredibly difficult time.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. As many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
The ayes have it. Order, order.